Hello, I'm Josh Brister, and this is the Christian Resistance. Thank you for joining us. Today, I have on a couple guests, but first, let me say something about the topic. We'll be discussing how best and the most effective way to respond to the challenges of secularism, of modernism, of atheism, and the whole woke and political correct culture. How do we frame a Christian response to those groups, to those ideologies, rather? But first, I want to introduce my guests. I have S.J. and Dr. Thomason and Dr. Brown on, and I want them to just briefly introduce themselves because I don't think they're on all the time. I'm not on all the time, but Dr. Thomason, can you go first?
Oh, sure. I'll be brief because I know we're gonna spend more time on Dr. Brown's information because she's got the excellent background for this topic. But I'm S.J. Thomason. I teach in a Florida university, and I teach business management classes, mainly leadership. I teach on human resource management and various areas. And I'm a Christian, and I came to Christianity in a really strong way back in 2012. But I was also raised a Christian and kind of floundered for a long time. And so I'm just happy to be back, happy to be born again, and happy to be sharing the good news.
Thank you. And Dr. Brown.
So I'm happy. I don't know what you mean. We're not. I'm on all the time. So I'm Professor Rachel Fulton Brown. I teach at the University of Chicago in the history department, and my research is in history of Christianity, medieval particularly. My books are on devotion to Christ and Mary and prayer and liturgy and biblical commentary. My teaching has ranged very widely across many different periods and themes, but largely focusing around these questions of performance and prayer and experience. So I think we have some easy answers to get out of this wokeness, and I'm looking forward to the topic.
Well, thank you again for both being here. I do appreciate it. I think y'all both have some useful, individual expertise on different facets of this. Well, let's just get into it. The problem, the way that I see it, is that we're being confronted in so many different ways, so many different levels by this different mindset. It's almost like a different religion or a virus is trying to invade us. This woke virus that's getting people to lose all understanding of common sense. Dr. Rachel Brown, the problem, as I see it, is that there's this secular mindset that tries to, explain away everything. Just look at it scientifically, look at it through the purely an individual perspective, an atomistic perspective. How do you see the problem that is facing us from the secular, from the modern, from the atheistic, this practical atheism, as you can see it in, abortions on demand or loading the judicial court? It's almost like there's this ideology that's trying to remake what it means to be a human, what it means to be a man and woman. How do you see it, Dr. Brown?
Well, we're participating in it right now. So for a long time, my main go-to is medieval or bust, right? And I recognize that much of what I understand about Christianity comes not even, I'm Catholic now, although I grew up Presbyterian and worshipped for a long time as an Anglican. But when I say I'm Catholic, I understand Catholicism rather differently than maybe more modern Catholics do. That I recognize a period in the history of the church that was, the way I usually talk about now, is much more grassroots and organic, and it grew out of the local experience of people's prayer practice. That it focused in a manuscript culture, which meant people had to copy their own prayer books, and so it was all very personalized, as well as communal in the sense that you're praying together in the churches, but you're praying the rosary or your Office of the Virgin or something like that, according to your own variants of it. And for a long time, I had a lot of difficulty figuring out, well, why does modern Catholicism therefore feel so different to me? It has devotion to Mary, at least, which is one of the things that I'm most interested in. It still has a link to the historical church. So at least people, when I mention someone like Bernard of Clairvaux, maybe not Rupert of Deutz, but people don't tend to know who he is, but Hildegard of Bingen, they know who I'm talking about, but there's still a very different feel to it. And I'm sort of flooded right now with the insight that I've gotten in my more recent reading. So I don't really remember how I used to explain this, but now, after spending several months reading Marshall McLuhan's work on the media, I think I get it, right? And what we are experiencing, and I have said this for a long time, what we are experiencing now with the online presence. I mean, I think what you're talking about with the wokeness and the sort of the frustration about how malleable everybody feels like humanity is, and we're in this transhumanist moment, and that's a problem. And it feels like there's no ground anymore. Well, it's because we're doing this online, right? You and I are able to talk in this format because of the capabilities that we've been given by this digital environment. And it's deeply unsettling, but it has certain characteristics that I think are now, if we can address them directly as Christians, are opportunities rather than dangers. But to get to this digital environment, we have to go through two others, right? So I start with it's thinking about the manuscript environment and the medieval, sort of immersive, associative, symbolic, highly metaphorical and sort of mosaic world of integrated understanding and so forth. I'm using actually vocabulary right there that I get from McLuhan because it's interesting. He started as a medievalist too. Starting from that world, we go into the world of the printing press, right? And that changes the whole thing. It changes the game completely. Everybody knows, the Protestants, they pick up on it, and they, have to have your Bible and sola scriptura. Well, the Catholics did too. And they, issued the formal list of the books that belong in the Bible, and they issue, liturgies that everybody has to say. We're in a big fight right now in the Catholic Church about which of those we're going to do, right? That kind of everybody has to say exactly the same liturgy is a function of the printing press. It was not the way in which medieval liturgies were performed or understood. They drew from a repertoire of texts and chants and so forth. With the printing press, you then end up with not just sola scriptura on the Protestant side, but the Roman Missal and the Breviary on the other, which held for a few hundred years, and then everything changed again when you got the electric media, right? You got the telegraph, you got the radio, you got television, we got movies. And as McLuhan understood, that changed everything. Again, you end up with, instead of an environment in which people understand, cause and effect linearly, as it were, this immersive experiential desire, right? And I think what happened, to a certain extent, what happened at Vatican II was also trying to play into that, right? They wanted to modernize, and they modernize their media, in unfortunate ways, as McLuhan pointed out. But the persistent desire of modernity is everybody being in the light, right? Belonging, right? Sort of tribalism that comes out of that. One more step, and I'll get it to the woke problem, right? What the downside of that is World War I and World War II, and all of the things that we've been worried about in modernity of how you can activate an entire population, simply with someone's voice, right? Desmond in his Matthias Desmond, talking about the mass formation, mentions the media, but he leaves out the most important thing of that is the radio enabled people to be sort of brought together in the same oral environment that they could all be activated. Okay, so just to set the stage there. Now that we're in this digital environment, two things happen. One, the internet remembers everything forever. So we're in a new media, a new memorial sort of situation. But it also, by way of all the social media, I think has created I think it's created the wokeness, right? I think that's what the wokeness is about. And it's a kind of the best place I can show it its manifest is in willingness to wear those masks the last 2-3 years, 2 years, 2-3 years. It doesn't matter anymore, right? What you're doing by wearing a mask of whatever medical sort you were doing is signaling your belonging, right? It's a signification of belonging. It's also a homogenization, right? I think what we're fighting, and this will be the end of my opening statement, right? I think what we're fighting is in fact something that's well, actually, no, I have one more step, the diabolic, right? The human element is we want to all belong, right? The diabolical element is our media has always been part of this world, right? It's always functioning so that it feeds the empire, it feeds the tyranny, it feeds what we're dealing with in the wokeness is nothing new, except insofar as it has new energy because of the deep, the sort of instantaneous interconnections that everybody can have over the internet media. So that's where I'd say we need to be thinking and talking, but we have to recognize the ground that we're participating in first.
Yeah, that's a great opening, and that's very interesting. I think we older people, and I would include myself into that. I don't mean that in any other way. Just a non-generation Y or millennial. We grew up with something called, well, I have a master's in library science. We grew up with something called the card catalog. When you go into a library, you use the card catalog to find books by subject, author, or keyword. It's a lot different than today. You can just go on in an electronic database. We also grew up with VCRs. Kids today, they know nothing of it. We didn't grow up with this instant gratification, or message board or something like that. So I think what you're saying has a lot of insights into into the technological revolution that we've been living through, and it sounds like this in the study of philosophy and history, this historic progressivism, that history is progressing, like an inevitabilism, like a historical inevitability. It's going towards something, and I think a lot of these kids today, Antifa, or these kids that you see at these BLM marches, are trying to live that through. I'm not sure if I got that across perfectly. Thank you for your opening.
Yeah, I'd like to add to her opening, because I think I can build off that a little bit, because I think that there's a few things going on that relate to exactly what she was saying and also what you're saying. Is we're all wondering what's going on with technology, where we're going to be 100 years from now, how the world's going to look. But I think what Rachel said was a pretty good point, was this idea of belonging, because right now everybody's looking for a group membership, and everybody's looking to establish a group and to be a part of a group. And it's unfortunately, it's become extremely hostile racially. It's become hostile in some cases with gender. It's just a lot of hostility built up. And a lot of times there are people who maybe 30 years ago, these same people, if they were living 30 years ago or 20 years ago, would have felt who were maybe part of groups that are typically not getting much attention, like say atheists. Atheism has risen quite a bit in the last 15 years. And I attribute much of that to people on social media who finally are able to find people who are like them, who have their beliefs maybe halfway around the world, and they suddenly connect. And maybe if they're in little podunk town in Tennessee, where they've been surrounded by a bunch of Christians and the Bible and all that kind of stuff, and suddenly they found somebody to connect with over in Australia, they've developed these networks and these groups, and they've established a strong identity for themselves. And I think that those little groups springing up, along with other ones that maybe traditionally had been left out, that's what we're looking at today.
Yeah. Rachel, first of all, do you have anything to say about to what I said or to what S.J. said?
Yeah. So the library card catalog is an interesting thing. That all of our search engines are designed around the categories that we used to use in those library card catalogs, right? Which I find, I mean, I'm actually in education right now, and I sort of have students that I set research papers for. They can't find stuff necessarily.
Mhm.
And so, us old people who actually use the card catalogs, we were also there as the databases were being developed. So we know what to search for, right?
Mhm.
It's like, I know how to
Yeah.
search for author, subject,
Yeah.
title, range around that. They have, unless they've been trained, which we had to be trained to use the card catalog.
Mhm.
Unless they've been trained, they don't have any native intelligence about
Yeah.
finding stuff, right?
Well, I think that
So the
I was just going to say, I think that they're
go ahead.
they're almost an alien compared to us, it seems, because they've grown up in this electronic database or a message board internet environment where we lived a significant portion of our lives without it.
Well, I'm okay with that because I figure I'm a hybrid of all sorts, right? One of the things that as Christians we need to understand is we're of this world, but not, we live in this world, but we're not of this world. So we're always going to have this hybrid feeling of, being alive at a particular time, but belonging to the eternal kingdom of God. So don't worry about it. But also the newer technology, as I just mentioned with the card catalog, derives out of structures that are embedded in it that the younger people don't necessarily understand. They don't necessarily have the sort of grounded
Mhm.
experience in looking for things in a card catalog that would mean that they can find stuff in the Boolean searches that they need to do. So they don't actually know how to find stuff, right? Which is frustrating, from our perspective. It's like, why can't, I'll look up something, I'll be sitting there actually in a student conference with them. And these are bright students at the University of Chicago, right? And they'll say, I couldn't find anything. And I'm like, okay, here, let me look on it on my iPad. I'll, do a search in a minute or two on the library catalog and say, well, did you find this? And they'll say, no, I didn't. They
Mhm.
don't know, right? That I think, just thinking out loud right now, that's one of the sort of alienating features of the internet is like, goodness, it's everywhere, right? It's how do you find anything out there? How do you search? That's why, we're ending up in the cancel culture and the lockdowns and the internet and, Google doing this and fixing with the algorithm and stuff like that. In fact, people don't know how to find the best information. They really
Yeah.
don't. And so they're relying on authoritative voices to tell them what to look for because they don't have much training in testing the search.
Mhm.
That's a bit of a parenthesis on some
Yeah.
stuff, but I think don't underestimate your experience from knowing the older media.
Yeah. And back to relying on authoritative, um, I, I think we can rely on tradition and history, but it seems that today tradition and history and, the past is looked down on, that we can do it better today. I think, um, uh, there's a reason. There's reasons why we do things a certain way. And I think a lot of the dismissive attitude towards the traditional values, the church, Christianity, and the rise of atheism really is built on the Enlightenment type skepticism, skepticism from Gibbon, from Edward Gibbon, his Fall of the Roman Empire, who said Christianity was all about bloodshed and so forth, was all about, David Hume, a plethora of other skeptics. But they've been given this false understanding of Christianity, this caricature, and it's built up in our culture. And they think the wise and intellectual thing to do is to just throw out the baby with the bathwater. So
Yeah,
I think that is a lot, explains a lot of the rise of atheism or the rise of a lot of these other ideologies. Yes, sir.
yeah, to add to what you're saying there is I think it's the idea of who has the moral high ground. Because right now it's people trying to, number one, they'll try to recraft exactly what happened with Christianity instead of talking about the first few hundred years that were in complete peace, where Christians weren't waging war and seizing land and doing all that kind of stuff. They'll ignore that and they'll go right into the times that Rachel likes to study, right into the medieval times, and they'll craft new messages around exactly what the Crusades were about and try to paint us as the bad guys. But now today we see the same thing, because now they're saying that Christians are against marginalized groups, when historically we were the ones reaching out to marginalized groups to help them. And so we've always been the ones who are supposed to help the good Samaritan, help the Samaritan on the side of the road, or help the stranger, do that kind of stuff. And the Christian message coming from the Catholicism idea, because I remember growing up in the Catholic Church, and it was do unto your brothers as you would have them to do, whatsoever you do unto the least among us, that you do unto me, and all these little songs that we used to sing about Jesus. And we were always that was ingrained. And now these days they're painting caricatures of Christians based on a handful of Christians, or maybe it's a large handful, but some Christians in the United States who do have pretty toxic views. And unfortunately, it's making everybody look like they're on the moral high ground for painting us in a bad light.
So think about what you're arguing about. We're thinking about authority, right? And what I just said about they don't know how to search in a card catalog. I mean, they literally don't know how to search in a library catalog, which is based on a card catalog, which has a certain organization, right? And I'd say, I mean, I'm on the internet a lot. I have a variety of platforms that I'm active on. I have my own Telegram channel, which is like the most, outrageous place you can be. It's neither neither China nor India, apparently. Like Chinese social media is its own one thing, and Facebook actually has more users in India than it has in the United States. So there you go. And Telegram, with our base in Dubai or wherever Durov is its own little thing, right? So what I actually see in my little world of the internet is lots and lots and lots of arguments about Christianity, quite deep, detailed and deep ones, all about authority, right? They're constantly fighting over, different denominations, the Orthodox and the Protestants and the Catholics and one of my good friends in Telegram is Coptic, right? She's apostolic Orthodox. The Russians, everybody is in fact arguing over doctrine and hierarchy and so forth. The problem is we have, because of the the media environment that we're in, I think there is no acceptable way to create authority in this internet, right? There was no spider, right? Where's the middle of a web when it encompasses the whole world? And I think what I'm trying to express about how we experience the media that we're involved in is going to affect the kinds of religious arguments that we end up in. One of which is, there are two, right? One's the authority. The other is there's an awful lot of argument online about, accuracy of claims, that, everybody's now an amateur historian going off and debunking this, that, and the other, which is, of course, frustrating those of us who are professionally trained in the field, because, you don't know how to read the sources. But the desire to, find accurate information is incredibly strong. The problem is, how do you train the fish to swim in the way that you want them to?
I'm curious, actually, this is kind of a side topic, but just thinking of the fact that you are a historian, and I'm thinking about the historians that we have in the ancient past that attest to some of the portions of the testimony around Jesus. And I think about Tacitus and Josephus. And I've noticed with a lot of people who are crafting their narratives, they'll take Josephus and they'll agree with a lot that Josephus says, except for a lot of times what he says about Jesus. So when he's talking in his own century, he was born in 37, he's talking about the first century, they'll say, oh no, Josephus is he's propaganda, he's crafting a narrative. What he says about Daniel, that didn't really happen. And what he says about, they have all this stuff, but then they'll build a lot of knowledge that we have today in history based on Josephus. So I'm curious to know what you think about Josephus.
Not much, because I haven't really studied him. But I think the stronger problem there is, the validity of historical sources, and that I have thought a lot, right? That, for example, in Christian debates, there'll be why is the Virgin Mary such a significant feature of your faith? She's not even there, and I'm like, well, she's in Luke, Matthew and John, but really in Luke, right? Why did Luke put her there? That all of our texts always, every text, every media, invention is written for a particular audience for a particular purpose, and we've understood that in scholarship for some time. I mean, it sometimes gets out into the general conversation. Like, oh, well, the Gospels are all different. Well, yeah, because they're addressing different audiences with different questions. So, insofar as Josephus' writing, I think he's writing for the Roman imperial audience that he wants to ingratiate himself with. And to understand his bias, you have to understand both the audience that he's addressing and his own need to be included in that community. It's a feature of every historical source, so it's not unique. Unfortunately, people tend to bracket, oh, here's religious sources and here's like trustworthy secular sources. Like, there's no such thing. They're all mediated through particular arguments.
And S.J., if I want to I want to just say that it also, from the Enlightenment, it does seem that this bracketing comes forth just conveniently when it's talking about Jesus, or when it's talking about miraculous claims. So there will be a discounting of divine intervention, no matter what it is, no matter in what event. So they'll just try to reduce said event to myth or legend rather than trying to look at the historical basis. So I often talk about this in my dialogues, and I think you do also, this anti-supernaturalistic bias, because we all have biases, and we need to be open-minded enough to say, well, let's look at this considering our biases, but let's look at this with an open mind and an open heart, and let the evidence lead where it goes. I think a lot of it has to do with an Enlightenment mindset that tries to discount miracles a priori before the evidence is even looked at, and this postmodernistic vantage point that says history can't really be known at all.
Right. And Josh, what I'm trying to encourage you to do is change your own lens on those phenomena. And that's why I'm including, it's been fun for me. It's right saying the Enlightenment, an interesting title since it's coming right before the invention of the electric light, right? And so you should say they're cast in darkness, but they're working out of in a knowledge environment that is printed, right? And they're working out of a mechanized and printed, and the things that you want to be able to put in a book and write about, right? The electric world, the one that comes in the 19th century, it's weird because there's a lot of mysticism and experience. If you think about the religious revival that happened in the 19th century, all new, the Mormons and other new movements, particularly in the United States, right? We have a lot of the burnt over district and stuff in New York, all of this enthusiasm, right? That is coming out of arguably this new media environment where the lights come on, but the spiritual effect of that is, we want to all belong in the light. We want to all belong together, which then it's actually the 19th century that gives the 18th century the title Enlightenment. I think it's not an 18th century term. What I'm encouraging us to do is reflect more powerfully on the media moment we're in. Right? Why are we having the tensions and difficulties and conflicts that we are? It's not. We can say it comes from the Enlightenment or it comes from the 19th century, but I'm now persuaded by my McLuhan meditation that we're most affected by the media environment that we're in right now, and it's very hard to see when you're experiencing it because you can see the effects of printing on the 16th century more clearly than we can even see the effects of electricity on the 19th century. But even at the time, people like Henry Adams, who's one of my go-to characters for talking about the way the Americans totally miss the Middle Ages in the early 20th century. He has a very famous comparison between the Virgin Mary and the electric dynamo that he saw at the Paris exhibition in 1900. Right, he goes to the hall of the generators, the hall of the electric dynamos, and he has this description of how after a while you have the it's a force. It's this, perpetually spinning wheel that you are impelled to pray to, right? This powerful engine of generation. And then he goes to Chartres, the cathedral, and famously says, all the steam in the world could not, like the Virgin, build Chartres. That somehow, and what's interesting, he's talking in terms of both of them as a force. And then you realize he's talking in terms of electric energy, power, electromagnetism. He wants to understand Mary's ability to animate and inspire medieval culture as if she's, I mean, he calls her a symbol, but he thinks of her as like an electric charge, right? This McLuhan plus Henry Adams finally helped me understand why there's apparitions of the Virgin Mary in the 19th and 20th centuries. I had never understood it at all, because to me, something like, Lourdes or Fatima or something, it just made no sense, right? Mary hadn't appeared. Mary didn't have those kinds of apparitions in the Middle Ages. Well, guess what? Now I get it. They're electric, right? And the earliest one, now I'm blanking. It is Lourdes, right? Or the miraculous medal, right? Where she
Lourdes,
appears,
yeah, definitely.
And her finger, the rings on her fingers are shooting light, right? She's standing there like, in a blog post I did recently, she's standing there like a telegraph, right? That, interestingly, and this is a sign, this is a great deal of hope, right? Christianity always takes over the media. And uses it to help us show our understanding of God. Christ himself was the alphabet, the Alpha and the Omega. That's an alphabetical thing, right? He owns the alphabet. Latin, the traditional Latin that we use to do our traditional Latin Mass and our prayers, is the language of the empire that crucified him, right? The printing press, I gave you in my opening statement, cause for concern because of the way it creates the split in Christianity, but it's also the great vehicle for spreading the prayer practices and spreading the faith. The Museum of the Bible right now in Washington D.C., right? It's about books. It's about the expansion of Christianity through books. So our opportunity right now is figure out what we can do with this digital environment, and that's rather than despair and say, oh, they're all woke and they're kicking us out. With joy and our understanding of Christ as the Word incarnate, we need to participate in that rather than deciding that we can't beat them. Well, we can't beat Satan, but we can speak into this place, I think.
Yeah, I definitely don't think we should just discount them and start our own group. I think one thing that I've been trying to do the best that I can is debate or dialogue. I'm more into the dialoguing now. Dialogue with the the heaviest and most sophisticated person that doesn't like Christianity, that is an atheist, that doesn't like Christianity or just rejects it. And I try to dialogue with them, and I try to study, and I've been doing this a while, but that's what I do. And I also try to have on great and amazing guests like yourself and SJ and others, and just to spread this word, spread this message, get the communication going on how we can best do this, my little place in the world. But I'm not just saying it's the enlightenment skepticism that's bringing this wokeness and rejection of tradition about. I also think that there's other forces involved, demonic forces. The longer I live, the longer I think Satan is real in the world, and I do think we need to bring more light in the world, and I think this is one way we can do that. SJ?
Yeah, I'll build on that a little bit because I was just thinking about the New Testament and the Old Testament. And I hear people make claims that no, Satan wasn't in the Old Testament, but yet we have references from Isaiah to Lucifer, and we've got, of course, the serpent, and we have Ezekiel that gives us some references to the king of Tyre and all that kind of stuff. So there are these references. And then the New Testament there were lots and lots of demons. Jesus was constantly casting out demons, and so were the apostles. And so you have that backdrop, and then suddenly we jump into the Enlightenment, and we jump into this period where people say you have to be rational, and it's just irrational to believe that there's a spiritual battle going on. And so somehow today you feel, if you want to actually say, yes, I believe there's a spiritual battle going on, or there are demons in this world, people will look at you like, oh my gosh, this person really thinks that? Oh, aren't you from the, you're a sophisticated person. You can't be thinking such an irrational thing. And so they've changed the whole story for us. And then just to add insult to injury, then they go back and you start to say the 1700s and the 1800s and the 1900s, but especially the 1700s and 1800s. And you get these people who are like Wellhausen and Doom and Doderlein and all of these people who've looked at the prophecies in the Old Testament and just written them all off and said, oh, no, it's not possible that we could see what was said in Leviticus and Deuteronomy, that if Israel is not acting properly, they're going to go into exile, because suddenly they did go into exile twice. And so that came true. And then we saw what Isaiah said that came true. And we saw what Daniel said that came true. And unfortunately, these people can't handle that. So they start crafting narratives about different people writing those books. So that's all I'll say. But I noticed we lost Rachel. Oh, good. She's back. Okay.
Welcome back.
The internet. The demons got you. The demons got me right when you're talking about them.
Their ears were ringing.
One, they seem to miss the Satan and Job, right? There's absolutely demons, and I think so. And this is where thinking about the early Christian experience is also helpful for us spiritually. That the earliest monks in the Egyptian desert specifically went there to fight demons. Right? You go out into the desert because that's where they are. Certainly, there are demons on the internet. Probably because what we're dealing with are, one, intelligences, like they're super intelligences, and two, angels are technically messengers, right? So if we're in this conversation about media and communication, of course the angels and the demons are going to be a part of it.
Yeah, and it says, even wasn't it Hebrews or Ephesians? I forget which one. It says you never know if you could be, be kind to strangers, because you never know if this person's an angel. And so.
Right. But thinking, I'm going to do a class next year on angels and demons, because I need to be thinking about this more deeply. But why the 18th century would be so anti-spiritualist is interesting, because in other ways it's not, right? I think we also tend to focus on certain thinkers and say, oh yes, they're the whole period, and they're not, definitely not. If you think about the 19th century, it's the history and rationalism and nationalism and philology, but it's also the occult and spiritual awakenings and ghost stories and such like that it's tricky to make sure that we're paying attention to the full range of arguments that came out of any given period. And most of history has people being religious more so than not. I'm not necessarily persuaded by the rise of atheists. I think there are people that are being religious in other fashion.
Yeah, I looked at, who was it? I'm trying to, it's J. Warner Wallace. I was listening to an interview that he had just recently, and it was funny what he said, because he was an atheist until the age of 35. He was raised as an atheist. His dad is an atheist, or was an atheist. And he said something like, it wasn't that I wasn't worshiping God, it's that I was worshiping God. I was the God.
Right. So one antidote to the immediate modernity that I suggest is I spent, now that we can like stream anything at any time, talk about digital, I went back and decided to watch all the 1950s biblical epics, like the Ten Commandments and stuff. I started with Quo Vadis and the Did Ben-Hur, and I was just watching The Robe. What's interesting is they used to talk about this actually, the Roman emperors declaring themselves gods, right? In Ten Commandments, Yul Brynner's Pharaoh is constantly, I am a god, I am a god. And what's, fascinating is how stupid that sounds. But they're coming out of a period in which, it's the 50s, not so very many years ago, they had like Hitler and FDR and Mussolini and all of the guys who had godlike voices because they were on the radio. And those voices came to people in their privacy of their living rooms and their, fancy boxes with the radio. The power of that transmitted voice to affect people is understudied, I think. But we're always going to be responding out of our created, well, how do you say, our humanity as body and soul, creatures made in the image and likeness of God, and either it's distorted or it's in harmony with God's will, and that's choices.
Mm-hmm.
There aren't other choices. Sorry.
Yeah, no, I think it's great that you're watching those old movies, and I do think that there is something to the TV and to all the new technology that we have as far as changing people's minds and perceptions. And it's one of the things that I just saw a study a couple days ago, and it was talking about younger people. And I've been trying to do studies on generations, and how I found from the World Values Surveys isolated the United States that the youngest generations under the age of 39 were more likely to justify a whole bunch of immoral actions. And I was trying to explain that. I can't figure out, why are they more likely to justify all of these different things like stealing and cheating on taxes and ripping off a bus driver and those kinds of things. And one of the thoughts that one of the studies I found said that people's perceptions of how frequent these kinds of things can occur can lead to their determinations that these things are more moral. And so if you feel like it's common that people are stealing or people are cheating on taxes or something like that, you might actually view that as a moral. You can justify that morally, which I thought, whoa, that's crazy. But that's what I was finding.
Well, technically they're right, because mores simply means customs, right? And we as social creatures tend to be very malleable, women particularly, at going along with the group, right? Mm-hmm. And that's another of the mass features that we've been witnessing over the last several centuries, that if you can be persuaded that everybody else thinks it, you'll start worrying about whether or not you're right to think it, and then you might, mm-hmm. which is why you're talking about doing the statistical polls and such. The more we do those, what everybody thinks, statistically this, that, or the other, those are mechanisms to persuade us. They're not mechanisms simply to find out. Mm-hmm. They're actually weapons that are used to persuade you to go along with the greater number.
It reminds me of a study I saw where there was a bunch of people. They did this study where they had people standing in a library, an elevator, and instead of facing the door, they were facing the back of the elevator. Mm-hmm. And so people would get in the elevator, and normally any other time you'd turn facing the door like we all do. Instead, they were pressured to turn around, and they were all facing the back wall. In the study, group after group, they kept doing it. And it just is, like you said, conformity.
Yeah, right. Groupthink.
As Christians, the thing that we have to be willing to do is stand up and say the truth, regardless of what the group is saying, which is terrifying, right? That is very well dramatized in these movies. Ben-Hur and the Robe and so forth, because they're Romans in the empire. I mean, they get killed, right? In the Robe, Richard Burton's character dies at the end. Sorry, spoiler alert. Because although he'll kneel to Caligula and say, yes, I recognize you as Caesar, he won't say that he doesn't believe in Jesus. And that kind of, that's what Christians have always brought. We're the salt of the earth, right? We're the salt of the society but there don't need to be that many of us, but we do have to have the ability to stand up and say, yes, I believe Jesus Christ is the Son of God.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, you cannot serve two masters.
Right, but you have to. I mean, I was in a debate this morning on Telegram with the trolls show up and try to, it's like, well, everybody should believe the way. And why are you Christians saying that, people who don't believe in Jesus aren't going to be saved? And we're like, we are. That's it.
Yeah.
Oh, well, apologize to me because you don't agree with me. And I'm like, I'm not apologizing because I don't agree with you. Mm-hmm. That's your problem, not mine.
Yeah, when I said I kind of swooped away from Christianity for a while, the reason was because I got swept up into that progressive idea. Mm. And I spent a whole decade thinking that all doors lead to heaven, that you didn't matter if you're coming through the Hindu door, you're coming through a Muslim door, you're all getting to heaven. It's universalism. I didn't know what the names were of what I was believing, but I was reading these books that were leading me to those ideas. And then all of a sudden, I actually sat down one day, and I was raised a Catholic, never encouraged to read the Bible. It was never encouraged, even though I went to 9 years of Catholic school. So I finally sit down and I start reading the Gospels, and I start reading, and I'm like, wait a second. Jesus doesn't say everyone's going to heaven. He makes it pretty specific that he is the way, the truth, and the life. No one gets through the Father except through the Son. And I thought, I've been believing the wrong stuff all this time. So I had to switch back.
I had a similar story. I used to not be a fan of the Catholic Church. I even talked to a priest once and told him that, I think it's completely wrong. I think a lot of that had to do with, the Protestant, the Protestant founding of America, just making up these myths of the Catholic Church. And then I started reading and, seeing that the history is not, it's not about the Catholic Church doing all these bad things. The Catholic Church was justified in so many of these things that they did. The Crusades were initiated for just reasons, because Christians were being persecuted by going to the Holy Land. The more I started reading, and now I consider myself, like a C.S. Lewis, but I call myself like a mere Catholic thinker. So I've really had a change by just stepping back, looking at history and tradition and how we got here with an open mind, and putting my biases on the table, but looking at history afresh again, instead of, the propaganda that we've often been fed through the media or through books that, try to denigrate the Catholic Church or Christianity. So I read books like, how the Catholic Church built Western civilization, and many books by Rodney Stark, and so now, I think the Catholic Church is true, and it is the one true church. And I even have my rosary here, and I just feel great by calling myself a mere Catholic thinker, and I never thought I would do that. It's just by having humility, and not believe in everything that I've been force-fed through the media or through others.
Well, it's interesting how we come back to the media, and it's like you were reading printed books, right? We need not to apologize for holding to the claim that we have truth, and that is where most Christians. That's where people get stuck, right? It's like, you're insulting me because you're saying that I can't blah, blah, blah. And it's like, I'm just telling you what I believe. And, and that we Jesus also told us, if they won't listen to you, shake the dust off your feet and leave. Right. Mm-hmm. So we're not, in fact, obliged to go in and execute the nationalist or the imperialist project of forcing everyone to the political solution, which is not Christian and never was. And we have the example from those 1950s movies are interesting because they're made at the period when America is at its peak, right? We've just, the United States had just, been victorious in World War II and is conscious of itself taking on a kind of Roman imperial role, and more critical of itself in a way that I think than maybe we are even now. I mean, we should be more critical of our imperial reach as a country, but Christians were never meant to be caught up in that exercise.
No, I want to, from what both of you are saying. Now, I said I was raised in the Catholic Church. I don't identify as a Catholic anymore, and so I don't want to say it's because of any bad things. There's a few things about Catholicism that I think are tremendous strengths. And the number one thing to me is the fact that there's a history, a very long history going all the way back to St. Peter. I think that's really strong. The Vatican, is Jesus said, on this rock I will build my church and the gates of hell will never prevail. Built on St. Peter. He died there at the St. Basilica, right there at the Vatican. And so you can see the roots of the church coming right up right there. And I think the history of having an authority who can make decisions for all of the Catholics, I think that's really important, because all of these other churches, one of the big arguments I get from atheists is they say, oh, you Christians, you can't get along, the Presbyterians, the Episcopalians, you all disagree. How are we supposed to come to an agreement when you can't agree yourselves? So I think the Catholics, and then the other really big thing that the Catholics have that I think that they will never lose, well, I can't say never, but those amazing, beautiful churches that they sometimes spent hundreds of years building, and that you go in, and the moment you go into those, like the Piazza del Duomo over in Milan, Italy, holy cow. You go in those and you just fall down to the floor practically. You're just blown away. It's so breathtaking. You're so full of awe. And it just reminds you of, yes, God is here. God is with us. And so these are some real big strengths that I think the other churches can't stand up to. They can't even compare.
Mm-hmm.
I would say with the arguments with the atheist, if that's where you're ending up a fair amount, but all arguments about either secularism or atheism have Christian ground, right? And that's like with my media argument about, we need to understand ourselves in the electric or digital environment. The term secular is only meaningful if you're Christian. And that's what's so ironic about it, saying, oh, we're only going to concern ourselves with concerns of this world. Well, by definition, that means that there is something else, right? And what's interesting about, the early modern period or the Enlightenment period is they tried to make the secular everything, without realizing that saeculum, the ages of the ages, is a term of contrast with eternity, right? Likewise, atheists tend to be fighting God, right? It's like they want to say, I don't believe in you, prove yourself. Well, they're asking God to prove himself, and we say as Christians, well, he did, right? What kind of proof would convince you, right? And so they're actually seeking to be, they're angry at God, and they want, proof informs that they are themselves demanding, rather than being able to see that God has given them the proof that they're asking for. They just are mad at him.
Yeah, I once had a debate with an atheist, and I asked him, what proof would convince you that God exists? And he said, if on the moon, or if there were signs saying I do exist, and I asked, I asked him, well, wouldn't you simply explain all that away and explain your perceptions away? And he said, yes, I would probably say I was hallucinating. Right. So I think if you start with that a priori philosophical bias, that one that comes from the Enlightenment, but I certainly do agree with you, Dr. Brown, that there are other forces involved. But I think there is this caricature that Christianity, it's thoroughly debunked. The problem is it hasn't really been tried and tested. When you look
tried and tested constantly.
Yeah, and it's never been debunked. You have this caricature of the media and of atheist polemicists that try to convince others that it has.
No, but I mean the biggest lie is that it's never been tested. It's been tested constantly. Right. And that's what's interesting about, the intellectual history of the West, or, orthodoxy, that the greatest minds of our tradition applied themselves to theology. It has been tested over and over and over again. It is, in fact, the thing we're constantly testing. For example, to go back to my profession, the profession of history, it was designed in the West by Christians trying to prove the reality of the incarnation effectively, right? It's like much of what we do in, the early modern history, all of those books that they're printing, they're histories that are grounded in the need to tell the story of Christianity. And, then in the most recent version of things, that'll be, to prove that they're white supremacist or imperialist or something like that. But they're mainly trying to prove the that God entered into time, which is why you end up in the West with such an intense interest in chronology and precision of time. This is the year 2022. I wonder why, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
we erase that by saying it's the common era. No, it's the Christian era.
Yeah.
It's the year of our Lord, and the all of the ground of everything that we care about, even to the point of debating the existence of God, is a Christian
Yeah.
obsession.
We all presume or presuppose truth. The atheist does too when he
Right.
tries to make
Right.
such bold claims. Yeah. And we all live in the shadow of a history that was largely built by Christians, many of them explicitly Christians in the scientific revolution. S.J., you mentioned the architectural revolution. I think of the 13th century with Chartres and others, but there's been revolutions, and Tom Holland discusses this. You've read that book. And yeah, so when the more I study, I simply don't think we're in a position as finite fallen creatures to say that Christianity is not true. We have every reason, though, to say it is true.
Yeah, we have plenty of support. It's so sad that when I was in my 30s and when I was in that kind of progressive lunacy, I didn't check into the evidence. I didn't even look. I didn't even read the Bible. I didn't look at any of the evidence that we have for it. But once I did, it almost clubs you in the head. There's so much.
Yeah.
So it's just, I mean, very satisfying evidence. And it wasn't to be, some people would say, oh, you went with the notion that you're trying to prove yourself. No, I could look objectively, even from just secular sources, and piece it all together in the early ancient times. And I'd say, if I just had to tell the story right here, even if I just had 1 Corinthians 15 too, even inside the Bible, but if I had to tell the story, I've got a lot of it right there. And so even if we didn't have a Bible, the church fathers have quoted it so much that if we had what the church fathers did, or even if we didn't have what the church fathers and the Bible said, we've got 9 secular people within 150 years of Jesus that you can take his whole story and piece it together. And so that's good for me. I mean, I'm good with that. I do one thing that Rachel, you brought up is the reverence of Mother Mary. And I have to say, as a person raised to revere Mother Mary in quite a lot of ways, and then suddenly I'm now going to a Baptist church where I feel like there's not enough reverence for Mother Mary. And so I feel like there should be some sort of a happy medium here where we should be revering her because she, of course, is Jesus' mother. She was the first one to know that he was going to land on the earth when he did. And she, Luke talks all about her, and so we know from her perspective. But I am feeling she is a very special woman that I don't think we do give enough attention to from the Protestant angle.
Well, that's why I, as a Presbyterian, wrote the books I did and then became Catholic, right? Specifically about Mary and the scriptural basis for the devotion to her, which then gets me to my sort of bigger sort of theme that I'm hoping to share with you is we need to figure out the ways that we can, in the media context that we're involved in, best communicate to people, right? And some of that is we just have to pray and be inspired because the Holy Spirit will help us. But if we're dialectic arguments don't work in this media, bluntly. And it sounds to me like both of you have prepped very deeply in the sort of specifics and details and such like that. The problem is they're not going to, as Josh, you're pointing out, they're not going to convince people because he'll figure out a way to say, oh yeah, that sign isn't a sign, right? Or, that history, history does to take that further step and say, okay, why am I persuaded by the historical evidence? I read, who was the guy who did the quest for the historical Jesus most recently, did a bunch of movies.
Schweitzer?
No, not he's in the 19th century.
Are you talking 20th century?
Yeah, there was a movie that was about him.
Is it Bart Ehrman?
No. Ehrman talked himself out of
John Dominic Crossan?
No, he talked himself into believing that at least as far as I understand the Jesus Project, you're trying to figure out exactly which bits are said by Jesus. misguided as far as I'm concerned. I'm sorry, I'm forgetting his. And
Oh,
I read a bunch.
shoot. Does it begin with a B? Is it Richard Bauckham?
No. Well, this
No.
is good. Now our listeners have all these new people to listen to.
Are you talking about in the first of the 20th century?
No, just like he's live right now. He's a ministry in Houston. No, not right.
Oh, Mike Licona?
No.
He's in Houston. At least I know that.
This is great. Look how many people we can.
I don't think it would be Mike Licona.
No. Oh, I've actually I talked with him. What's lovely is look how big the conversation is, right? It's like we can just off the top of our heads come up with all these people who are actually trying to make the argument. Why do we feel we're not succeeding? I think we're succeeding more than we realize. And the sort of what would a Christian world look like now is maybe the question. It's like what are we aiming at that we would like to have happen, and how much of it is, I mean, I think from the medieval terms, sure, it's going to happen at the grassroots parish, church by church level, right? That's how we should grow. We should not look for the big
Lee Strobel
universal single answer, right? We're fractured into lots and lots of different conversations, and yet we still have the Word of God, right? So what do we want? What would success look like to us? Josh, you asked us on to fight the woke. What do you want to, who do you want to, who are you not waking?
Let me just really quickly, somebody in the audience here said the case for Christ. So could it be Lee Strobel?
Yes.
He's in Houston.
That's it.
Okay.
That's it. It's Lee Strobel. Well done.
I was about to say Jordan Peterson.
Yeah, you don't want to go there. Peterson. Not with me. Don't go there with me.
I like Jordan Peterson.
Okay,
so yeah, the woke, what do we want it to look like now? What should people be? I wish I would see people waking up. I'd love to see I'd love to see us awaken again to Christianity. I'd love to see the world awaken again to Christianity. I think there's too many people in the West who are apathetic and sleeping.
I see Skylar is in the chat. Hi, Skylar. He's doing his very best to convince you guys that I don't know what I'm talking about. Let's talk about Genesis.
He and his two friends are there. So we got Dr. Josh, Digital Hammurabi, and Kip Davis. So they were just.
Oh, they all. I'm so happy to see you guys.
They all made a video recently. I actually got and listened to their video.
Skylar had me on, and he thought I was a marshmallow, and he came in with the "Do you believe in Genesis?" literally question, and I said, "Well, you have to frame it correctly."
You were on Skylar's channel?
Yes, a while ago. Clearly, he remembers me well. But I'd say sorry, I was reading the chat because I hadn't looked at the comments recently. What would our success feel like? And Josh, I feel like I missed what you said.
Well, you ask a good question, because I think we may be having more successes, like you said, that we don't know about. Maybe we're just looking at, immediate responses, of people changing their view. Maybe down the line, maybe what we're doing will have ramifications down the line. So I think as long as we keep talking, keep sharing the gospel, keep doing apologetics, keep doing dialogues, doing these conversations, and a whole lot of other things, possibly down the line there will be, we'll see something, or maybe we won't see something. I don't know. Maybe there's just a dystopia future ahead. I don't know. If this is a battle that we can win, I'll be frank with you.
We can't. Christ already won it.
Yeah.
Right. I think it's interesting to think about, because somebody said this, and I'm trying to remember who, and I don't remember who, so I can't give credit to the person, unfortunately. But somebody said something like, because I was wondering why is there a spiritual battle going on? Why does it persist? Doesn't Satan realize that eventually Christ is going to, at Revelation, we're going to see the world's going to end and Satan's going to go into the pool of fire and all this kind of stuff. And I think, why are they still fighting? And someone said something like, they want to delay, they want to prolong their time here,
delay the
as long as
inevitable.
possible. So
Right.
if they can keep converting people to their cause, then
Yeah.
they're winning some souls. And until we have the, I don't know, the vast majority, every tongue speaking Christ, then they have a long time in this delay that they've been building on.
Yes, well, the way my friend Vox Day puts it is the ride never ends, right? And it's like he's very Christian. It's very inspiring listening to Vox, although he refuses to argue theology. Absolutely, right? And I'm like, I actually agree with him there. I don't, in fact, enjoy arguing theology. It's a dialectical practice, and I'm more into the rhetoric. That, you know, conflict is the air we breathe. It's the water in which we swim, to quote Vox. That we are going to be in this conflict for our whole life, right? We are the church militant, and that is, you know, sort of functionally to get to be despairing that we haven't like beaten them all now. This is what we're here for. We're here to, and as I put it in my own sort of meditations, train in virtue, right? The demons are sent to us to make us stronger. They're sent to us to challenge us, to get us to think more, you know, to fight, right? We have to pray, we have to fast, we have to, you know, understand, praise God, and be with us, be with ourselves in the fight. And, you know, you win one soul, that's a huge win, right? It's Christ has already beat you know, won the battle for us. We're here to practice as foot soldiers.
Yeah, we're here to mimic, walk in his footsteps.
I still go back to St. Paul, and I'm just, it's really, really fascinating when you think about the people who Jesus uses to make his work, to complete his work. And you've got Paul, who is probably, he's standing there at the feet of St. Stephen. He's got his papers. He's going to kill all these Christians. Everyone fears the guy. And Jesus is like, boom, on the road to Damascus, you will do this. It wasn't, he didn't say, Paul, would you do this? No, Paul, here's what you're going to do. And Paul did. He did exactly what, and you get that these people, like, I look at me, how is it possible somebody like me, I'm far from perfect, and it's like, how is it that my eyes have been opened, and it's just, I think sometimes he might pick the strangest people and work through us, and so I think it's great.
Absolutely. It's like there's nothing special about me except for I had this, you know, bee in my bonnet about figuring out biblical commentary in the Middle Ages. That we are God, and my prayer that I have on my blog, my Fencing Barrett prayer blog, is from Augustine's commentary on the Psalms, where he talks about the soul as a sword, that, you know, but what is the sword worth unless it has the hand that wields it? And his imagination is he's made his soul a sword to be wielded by God as God wills. So we surrender ourselves to God's willing that we fight the fight that we are, and you know, leave it to God to worry about whether or not we're winning or not. And the thing is, I think, Josh, too, you were saying we don't know what effect our words have. I don't, as a teacher, I don't necessarily know what people carry off with them. They may or may not tell me in the future. I don't know what effect I have in any context that I'm speaking in. So we speak the truth. We, you know, stand up and you know, witness joyfully to our Lord, and that's what we're called to do.
Yeah, that's good. That's a great point. I think we've been at this. We've had a great conversation. We've been at this for an hour and 7 minutes. That's a good conversation. I think we should probably end it here. Is that okay, everybody?
Okay. Do we want to answer any of the conversations that's going on in the comments? It's mainly Skylar.
You know what?
You know, Skylar should get his own show. He seems to have a lot to say.
Oh, he has one. He's been running videos.
I know.
I was going to say, he's been, because I've been noticing, like, he's kind of on a roll. Every day he's running these videos. He's going into this Christian clubhouse thing and finding Christians and arguing with them. And then he posted on YouTube his arguments with the Christians. And
let me read some of what Skylar says. No, this is the thing is, this is what internet battles can be like, right? And I think there need to have a willingness to be joyful and mischievous about it, which I'm about to do, and to acknowledge that it's meant to be a bit of a wrestle, right? Skylar says at 4:02 p.m., how can you be a PhD professor and have such poor communication skills?
Oh, that wow.
Heaven Bound said, Skylar, do not judge so that you may not be judged. Skylar says, she's talking about media with an unclear point. Skylar, you can't beat Satan? Iron Matt, I don't know who that is. The biggest lie Satan has gotten us to swallow besides you can be like God is that he doesn't exist. That's true.
That's
right?
true.
Ivy Nova, always nice to see you. It's good to see you too. So it looks like we've had a good chat, a good conversation going on in the chat.
Oh, do you
Mel was there too.
Somebody's asking here. Do you believe,
Yeah.
Rachel? I'm curious to know this because I studied both sides on this point and looked at what the ancients said, and so I formed an opinion, and I won't share it because I'm first curious to know what do you think about the perpetual virginity of Mary?
I think it makes sense in the sense that she is made to be the temple of God, and God. I actually, if you really want the best explanation I've seen of this, it's on Jonathan Pajot's videos where he talks about her as the temple and the place consecrated to the presence, right? And so she is the Holy of Holies, and the Holy of Holies in the temple was lined with gold. It was the most pure, most sacred room. So she is, and this works particularly in the Orthodox tradition, right? She is the Holy of Holies. That is why the perpetual virginity makes sense. That God is the only one that dwelled in her.
I think Scott Hahn or Hahn, I think he also talks about that.
Yes, Scott and I have a similar path because he was a Presbyterian growing up too. And so he and I have both been very interested in the scriptural basis for the traditions. And his book, Hail, Holy Queen, is lovely on Mary. It's very nice.
Yeah, your side, and I'll just give you the support for the side that you're on too, is people like Brant Petrie. Brant Petrie is probably one of the most amazing speakers in Catholics that I know, and he's got an amazing insight on that. And that goes back to Saint Jerome. Jerome also thought about the perpetual virginity of Mary. I think actually that it seems more clear in the text because they referred to Jesus as the firstborn, and also they said that Joseph didn't consummate the marriage until Jesus was born. It says that in Matthew. So you've got Matthew and Luke's accounts that do kind of point to having somebody else. But then the argument is, then why did Jesus give Mary over to John instead of the brothers on the cross? And so that's the other argument. So Helvidius in the ancient past was arguing not against the perpetual virginity, but Jerome was arguing for it. And so there is an argument. So one day we'll all know.
I tend to go with the liturgical answer and that Jonathan does. So yeah.
Well, does Kip Davis or Dr. Josh, do y'all have any questions for us, especially, for any of us before we wrap up? Do you see any, S.J.?
I see Skylar wanted to come in here.
Yeah, well, unfortunately, we're about to end the talk today.
I'll read Skylar. Skylar, he says, I like Rachel's rambunctious and pushes back. Thank you.
No, that's good. Well, I'm glad you invited us on here, Josh. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you both. Thank you both for being here. I think I think everybody said a lot of great things. I hope I said maybe one good thing, but thank you very, very much, both of you, and I hope we can set up something else in the future, because what you are doing is great, and I want you to keep doing it. We all need to keep fighting the fight. We're all created in the image of God here, but we need to fight against ideologies that are seeking to control people. We need to bow everything down at the feet of Christ and follow him in humility. Thank you both again. And I thank you all for watching here today. And I'm going to say goodbye. And if I can hit the right button. Okay, bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.